My guest is Aella, who is a writer, blogger, data analyst, and sex worker who has written extensively about the psychology and economics of online sex work, conducting extensive surveys and research in order to understand the ecosystem of sex workers. She grew up in Idaho as the oldest of 3 daughters of conservative parents who were part of a community of fundamentalist Christians where she was homeschooled. Their family name has been withheld in the media coverage for privacy reasons. She moved out at age 17 after a fallout with her parents, and in 2012, after quitting a job as an assembly line worker in a factory, began working as a cam girl. She eventually became one of the highest earning creators on OnlyFans, making over, hang on to your hat here and sit down, $100,000 in some months. Wow. Okay. By 2021, she was described as having set herself apart partly by conducting extensive market research. For example, surveying over almost 400 fellow female OnlyFans performers about their incomes and identifying factors that were correlated with higher earnings. All right. Hi, Ella. How you doing? Thanks for coming on.
Hi, I'm doing great. Happy to be here.
Yeah. No, this is great. I wanted to have you on because I've had 2 other guests on the show. I had, I think you know both of them, Louise Perry for her book, The Case Against the Sexual Revolution. And then I had Rachel Moran. I don't know if you know her. She wrote a book called Paid For, My Journey Through Prostitution. It's quite a moving memoir of her experiences as a prostitute in Dublin in the early 90s, I think it was, before the internet. So I wanted to get your thoughts on some of the issues there. I tried to steelman your position because I've seen you do some of the debates on this, but now I have you, so I don't have to steelman. But before we do any of that, since we cover a lot of issues related to religion in the magazine and on the show, give us a sense of your background. What was it like being homeschooled? Is it anything like that? The Westover's book, Educated, Tara Westover's book, and being raised by these doomsayers, fundamentalists, and all that. What was it like for you?
I think it was like slightly more normie. I would say like a slightly more closer analogy is like the Duggars, the 16 kids. It wasn't quite that, but like that would be more of a closer thing. So definitely homeschooled, very traditional gender roles. My dad's a professional. It's possibly that you know who my dad is, actually.
Oh.
I'm not going to say.
Okay, all right.
He's a professional Christian debater person.
Oh my God, maybe I've debated him.
It's maybe.
That's really funny.
So I grew up in like a super like a professionally Christian household, basically. I memorized a whole bunch of the Bible. I was very devout up until I was an adult. Took it seriously.
You took it seriously, right? So just as a matter of curiosity, what kind of curriculum do you have? Does the state decide what homeschooled kids should learn, and how does that work?
We moved from California to Idaho when I was young. Partially due to state laws. I don't remember exactly what they were, but I know they're a little bit more restrictive in California about homeschooling. And in Idaho, I think it's more lax. So I remember I would occasionally take I would go into a normal school once every couple of years to do some sort of fancy test. And I wasn't really quite sure what they were doing. But I think they were probably checking to make sure that I wasn't completely falling off.
Well, we can't run the counterfactual because you can't replay the tape of your life. But in your mind, you think, well, I turned out okay. Actually, you hear these stories about crazy homeschooled kids or whatever. But, look around, I see the public school trained kids and I'm just as good as them or whatever. How do you assess that?
I think I'm better.
Better.
To be fair, I think that's nuanced, right? I'm not saying homeschool. I'm quite a proponent of homeschooling. My childhood was very hard. My parents, especially my dad, was pretty abusive. And that wasn't great. But I think that homeschooling, kind of by accident, gave me a very good relationship to learning. And I think it's quite tragic. When I got out of being a homeschooler and I was hanging out with a whole bunch of public school kids, it was just little things. Their relationship to learning, I was like, why are you so averse to being curious about things? Why do you really not want to learn anything? We would be talking about something, I'm like, oh, we could go learn that right now. And people would look at me like I was insane. And I'm like, oh, I eventually realized that they had gone through a thing where every single thing that they had learned was because they had been forced to do it. To them, learning things was exactly equivalent to somebody telling you to do something you don't want to do. Largely. And I'm like, okay, no wonder you have such a fucked up relationship to education. This is really sad.
Do you have a sense of what percentage of homeschoolers were or are religious versus secular?
I would guess if I had to put money on a betting market, I would guess 85% are religious.
Yeah.
But that's just gut.
Yeah. So the sense is, and you probably heard this from your father, I'm guessing, is that government schools, they're teaching us propaganda like evolution and trying to turn everybody into atheists, and we're going to avoid that in public schools.
And sex. I did briefly go to public school when I was 14, and my parents had a whole little falling out with the school because they had me do this exercise where you're supposed to, like in speech class or something, you have to rank burning buildings, save people, in what order of people do you save if you can only save one at a time. My parents were like, that is a bad thought experiment and you should not be doing it, and they complained to the school.
That's wild. Yeah. Okay. So let me now try to steel man these two different arguments, Louise Perry's case against the sexual revolution and then Rachel Moran's paid for. So let's start with that. Rachel is against the idea of even calling it sex work. It's not sex work. It's prostitution. It's abuse of women. And of course, her stories, when you read her memoir, it's very moving. I mean, it's an incredible piece of literature, well worth reading. But maybe this is because it's in the place and time before the internet where, what you were doing is you're safe in your home. She's on the streets of Dublin late at night, backseat of cars, crappy hotels, these just disgusting guys. I mean, some of these things she describes, it's just really awful. I mean, so when you read that, you go, yeah, that's pretty abusive and disgusting. I can see that. But then when I hear your case, it's like, well, okay, maybe this is are we talking about different things here?
Yes. I mean, I do think, I found that the quality of the guys that I saw went up as I increased my prices as an escort. Because I did work as a full service in-person sex worker for some years. I still am. And it's interesting because there's definitely the sort of thing which I think is so typically associated with drugs. Like, you're addicted to drugs, you sort of have fallen off the normal life path of doing college or jobs or whatever. And so you do sex work, and this subjects you to pretty bad situations because you need protection, which now you have weird power dynamics. And it is really exacerbated by the fact that it's illegal. The fact, things are much safer now because we have access to, for example, blacklists. The need for pimps and protectors in this sense has dropped quite a bit because you have the internet of women who talk to each other and exchange information about who to avoid. The one downside, though, is that you can't go to the police, which is definitely a problem. It's definitely complicated. I'm not going to say that prostitution is fantastic. I also don't care about terms. We can call it prostitution, sex work. We can call it blue ball juggling. I don't give a shit. It's definitely nuanced. I'm not saying it doesn't have downsides, and I think for some people it's quite traumatic. And I think probably if you're in the kind of situation where you're subject to a lot of difficult power dynamics, and you are underprivileged in a few ways, this seems like it would be pretty tough to go through.
Yeah, well, she was pimped out as a teenager by her boyfriend after I think her father died. The mother was a drug addict and then got kicked out of her home. And then they were just, she was on the street. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty bad. So turning to that as an economic opportunity doesn't seem like the same as, let's say, getting a job at McDonald's or some company, something like that. But now the idea today is to legalize it, regulate it, unionize the women,
decrim.
Yeah, decrim. Yeah.
We want decrim. If you talk to anybody active in the sex worker community, we don't want legalization. We want decrim.
Okay, what's the difference there?
Legalization comes with regulation. And historically, when you regulate things, the government doesn't do a very good job at it. In some situations, it makes it worse or just transfers the problem. For example, if you right now, I'm full service and independent. I set my own rules, my own rates. I do my own testing at the STD risk rate that I judge as good. Whereas if you are required to work at a brothel, for example, the brothel will take a percentage of your pay, or you have to rent the room in order to operate there. And then the only guys that you can see are the guys that come into the brothel. So it really it removes the power from the woman into the hands of whoever is set to control her safety. I think if you just give women the tools to protect themselves, then they're going to use that to the degree that is correct for them. And this is better.
Yeah, this was her argument on some of the models that are being tried. I forget where now. I think in Northern European countries and
the Nordic model. Yeah.
Yeah, the Nordic model. Yeah, that's it. Sorry, thank you. You know about this than I do. That even the regulated and unionized and so on, at some point, like, so here was their example. So a guy pays for X services, whatever he wants, and you get in the bedroom with the woman and you decide, you know what, I want more. And then she says no, and then he goes to the management and complains. She didn't do what I wanted her to do. And that the management will side with the guy because he's the one who's paying, and the women still get screwed, so to speak. And it's still unfair, and it's still abusive to women.
Yeah. I would rather get rid of management. Like,
Okay.
the problem is if you have to work with management, right? Like, if you have to be with that person, if you work with that management, you're fucked. Like, you don't have free choice. Like, usually the problems in sex work come down to a lack of agency. It's like, oh, you are not allowed to make things better for yourself in varying ways. Like, you're being coerced in some way. When this happens, I think it's really terrible. But a lot of the fact that their coercion exists is because of the social and legal landscape around it. Like, for example, for me, sex work has overall been a great experience. But there's one guy who dropped through screening. Like, my assistant who was supposed to screen things thought that I screened him, and I thought that she screened him. It was a miscommunication. And so I saw a guy who I really should not have seen, and then he got like really violent and aggressive in sex work, like during the thing. And that like wasn't great. And I was like, man, this is terrible. But the most I could do was put him on the blacklist. I couldn't go to the police. I was too afraid, right? And so like we're just victims in this case. And like, if we just didn't get arrested for going to the police, if we weren't under that risk, or for example, when I was living in Texas, I had a stalker show up at my door dressed up as the FBI and tried to arrest me, which was very scary. He like later we found out he had a murder weapon and he's in jail now. Like, it was very scary. But like when this happened, I had to wait like a full day before I called the police because I had to go talk to a lawyer. Because I'm like part of he came and he knew I was a sex worker and he was like trying to like quote arrest me for sex work. And I'm like, do I want to out myself as a sex worker to the legal system? I'm really scared of doing that. And so I was like, there's a whole period of time where I wasn't able to tell the police this, and that was valuable.
So decriminalization would solve that problem.
Yes.
And then there's debates in different states have different laws about this, whether you should arrest the prostitute or sex worker, or the guy. What are your thoughts on, who should be punished or what? Well, other than nobody should be punished.
I think 2 consenting adults are all it takes to not punish someone. Like, if 2 adults have consented to do things with their own bodies, it's pretty fucking ballsy to go in and be like, I'm going to imprison one of you for doing that. If one of them is coercing the other, then I would support an arrest. In this case, typically it's more the John coercing the escort, if there's going to be some direction of coercion. But it's often the escorts, like lower end, often will like theft as happens. I did a survey where like a non-trivial number, like maybe 10 or 15% of men reported being stolen from.
Oh.
They also can't go to the police, so.
Yeah, right, exactly. There was a Seinfeld episode like that, right, where George gets picked up by an attractive woman and she takes him back to a hotel room and handcuffs him to the bed. And then she comes out with his wallet saying, $8? That's all you got is $8? He's like, you're robbing me? Wait, are you coming back? It's hilarious, yeah. Well, okay, so then Rachel's other point is that even if you're 18, 19, you're an adult, even if you're in your early 20s, maybe you didn't enter this out of real choice. Maybe, the choice between McDonald's and this, well, I'll do this. It's kind of a volitional choice, but on the other hand, maybe there's economic pressures. You're broke, you're homeless, or drug addicted, or whatever. So you start off with these strikes against you, and this is perceived to be a rational choice, but it's really not good for women. That's kind of her argument.
I think that's infantilizing. I think like the steelman of that argument would be something like, if you are not aware of the trade-off you're making, if you think you're going to earn a certain amount of money and you don't earn that money, or if you're not aware that there's risks, right? Then I think this is probably a good argument. And like the answer to this would be education. Be like, hey, if you're thinking about trying sex work, here's a list of all like the benefits and trade-offs and how the average amount of money women make, how likely it is, so people can make more informed choices. But I find like a lot of this to be disingenuous because like they're not showing the same amount of concern for other things. If it were consistent, I would be more sympathetic. But like I got into sex work after being in a factory, like working on a factory floor for a year. And I consider that to be horrible. Like sometimes I have nightmares where I have to go back to work on the factory floor. I don't know how the other factory workers handled it, but I was like drinking every night to do it. We were working like weekends and very long days. I was waking up at 4 a.m. just every day on the floor. There were no windows and like doing this routine thing. And I consider that to be like a waste of a life. That was really awful. And to me, like the offer of sex work was life-changing. It was the best thing that could have possibly happened. I find a lot of people who are anti-sex work tend to not know what it's like to be poor or have forgotten or something. Not everybody, obviously. Like some poor people have gone through like the very lowest end possible form of sex work, which is the most disadvantaged. But people are like, people don't give a shit. People, I say, oh, I worked in a factory, and they're like, that's nice. And I say, oh, I did sex work. And they're like, oh my God, are you okay? When I really like sex work. I really like it. I don't have to sex work anymore because I make sufficient money, but I still do it kind of for fun. But like, I consider a factory work, like who are you to say that McDonald's is not better than working as an escort? The thing is, I think women are like very different on like the sociosexual spectrum. I'm very sociosexual. I like casual sex. I like having a whole bunch of sexual partners. To me, sex is fun and I don't really need an emotional attachment. This makes sex work very easy for me. I think for some women who don't have this sort of mindset and sort of don't believe that that mindset is possible, or they believe that that mindset is the result of trauma, there's sort of typical mind fallacying where they're like, oh, if you're doing this, you must be fucked up in some way and it must secretly be damaging you because they personally could not imagine doing it themselves. So I think this is where a lot of the pushback against sex work is coming, is women who really are not cut out for sex work, who probably shouldn't be doing sex work, who are like really offended by the idea that you could have, like it feels like sort of violating in some way to have sex with a stranger for money, telling other women that they shouldn't be doing it either. And I'm like, just let me do what I want. Just leave me alone. You're trying to control my body in the same exact way the religious people were. I just want you to fuck off. It's a little bit the way that I feel.
Are you libertarian, by the way, politically?
Yeah. Georgia stand cap, but something like that.
Yeah. That's always been my position on it, because I do have strong libertarian leanings. What consenting adults do in the privacy of their bedrooms is none of my business. Okay. But then the arguments, again, I've been making from Rachel and then others, like another one. What's wrong with a polygamy? That is, some old guy gets to marry 15 young women. What's wrong with that? Well, these girls, this is the counter, these girls are not raised to have any idea what it's like to be an adult, autonomous woman making choices. All they know is this culture they grew up in, fundamental Mormonism, and all they've been told is, you're going to marry that old guy down the street there. Oh, okay. And by the time they, reach adulthood and they consent, like in these TV shows, oh yeah, I can't wait to get married. But they really are not volitional beings. They don't know what the options are.
Yeah. I think there's like two things here. One is, what does cultural norms say is good? And in that case, you could argue that we are similarly brainwashed. Like, for example, school. Everybody goes to school, you force kids to sit down, and objectively, you are forcing human beings to do things that they don't want to do and to sit down in a room they don't want to be in. You could imagine maybe in 500 years, we look back on this with horror. You're like, they were raised to want it, to agree with it, and then to do that to their own children. So there's like one thing where it's like, you can make anything culturally okay, and it's like kind of a complicated thing to argue whether or not it actually is okay. Like if you're experiencing it as bad, like very likely those women were experiencing it as lovely, or at least some of them were. And then separately, there's like sort of the object level thing. Like, are you experiencing distress or pleasure when the thing is happening to you? I think this feels sort of more important. I forget what the original question was.
Yeah, it's okay. We're just bouncing around here. I was talking about, with the consenting and being rational in your choice, if you don't have an educational background to know what the choices actually are as an adult, then you're not really, again, with polygamy. Anyway, so how do people find you? How do your clients or men find you?
Tryst.link, TRYST.link. I'm not paid to shill for them. They're sort of a new directory that came up and just are much more ethical and better than the competitors. So I'm happy to. It's a directory of sex workers where I have a guide to hiring a sex worker. If anybody is interested, it's on my blog.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, that's what the reason I'm asking is because, are you unusual? Are you just, the 6 standard deviations out from the mean, and all the other women are being degraded and abused and you're just a standout? Or can anybody walk in now and plug into the system that you're using and be safe, make good money, and truly make a rational economic choice?
Yeah, I think adjusting for disposition. Again, if you're not a sociosexual woman, I would not recommend sex work for you. I think that probably this is going to have like long-term psychological effects. If you do not like the idea of casual sex at all, that's like a pretty good proxy for if you're going to like sex work or not. Do not do that. But that being said, if you like, I would say that if you are interested in sex work and you have a good disposition, there are safety mechanisms to follow. There's like so I wrote a guide also for people who want to get into sex work. So you do screening methods. You can talk to other escorts. There's like communities around this. It's pretty safe. Like if you go on to like Tris, for example, you can see many thousands of escorts. I did a survey some years ago of escorts. This is not a super good survey because it's not random, right? I just like went around asking escorts that I could find online. Which is, again, a selected sample. But still, they rated I asked, like, what's your satisfaction, like, on a scale from, I think, 0 to 7. And it was, like, medium positive. They said, like, around, I think it was 5.5 out of 7 is, like, how satisfied they are with sex work. Is correlated with how much money they're earning. So it's, like, not, again, it's a nuanced job. It is a job. It has downsides. It's not the best. But it can pay a lot of money. I do make quite a lot of money. I am a very unusual in that regard. And it's probably correlates with how much I like it.
I mean, yeah, well, I won't ask exactly, but you mean like well into the 6 figures or even 7 figures a year?
Yeah, when I was escorting full time, I was making around between 30 to 50K a month, ish. But now I do it rarely and I do it for fun a couple times a year, and I charge, I think, 4K for the first hour and then 1,000 each additional.
How do you know what to charge? What's the are there union dues, union fees?
Union fees. You can see what other girls are charging, and you sort of like pick something that looks like it's roughly in your range, and then you see what the demand is like. And then the demand changed. So I was working, I think, at 800 an hour to start. I quickly realized that the demand was extremely high, so I like started bumping the price up until eventually fewer people started booking, and I hit the amount of busyness that I wanted to be at. That's usually how most of the girls who do this, how it works.
By the way, as a practical question, how does the IRS know what you're doing, or what do you declare on your tax returns? How does that work?
Yeah, I do pay taxes, and I did when I was doing this full time. I just say it's not prostitution. I don't know.
I'm doing services. Okay.
Yeah, like coaching or
Yeah.
modeling or something. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the arguments that Louise makes in her the case against the sexual revolution is based on this not being, what did you call it, sociosexual?
Sociosexual,
yeah. Being that there's an average difference between male and female sexual psychology. And we all know what it is. And so if you're in the middle of the bell curve as a female of female sexuality, you're probably not going to like sex work. So if you're an average woman, then looking at you're going to have a hard time mind reading. That is, putting myself in your mind and thinking, if I was doing what she was doing, I would hate it. Therefore, you shouldn't be doing it. That's the problem, right?
Yeah, my guess is this is what's behind a lot of the horror that some women have around sex work, yes.
So I had David Buss on the podcast. I don't know if you know his work. He wrote a book, Why Women Have Sex with Cindy Marston, and then he did another book on When Men Behave Badly. So here they outline, by the way, I was quite surprised at this, why women have sex. I had no idea, like pity sex, revenge sex, boredom. I'm like, oh no, I don't want any of those. I just want her to want me. And I guess that's my mind reading problem. I've never paid for sex. And my sense is if I paid for it, then she doesn't really want to be with me. And I don't want to have sex with somebody who doesn't want to be with me. That doesn't sound fun.
Yeah, this is fair. I think it depends a lot on the escort. And the compatibility. I mostly view escorting as like sort of an excuse to have casual sex, which is often not very good. Casual sex is not the best. It's novel, right? At least, but
Well,
this is fair. I think this is
you mean because the men they're not good at it, or you're just not into them?
Yeah, partially, because like when you're escorting, you don't get to filter based on in-person chemistry. It's not like you are having sex because you had like really good banter at a bar. So you're not filtering for people you don't have chemistry with. And also first time sex is pretty bad because you're still learning the other person's body.
Right. Okay, let me just read some of these quotes from David's work here on human sexuality, and then you can respond. It's not a criticism, just commentary. Many men are burdened by lust for a variety of different women, constant cravings that cannot ever be fully satisfied. It explains why a handsome movie star such as Hugh Grant would have sex with a prostitute despite having Elizabeth Hurley, a gorgeous model and actress, as his then steady girlfriend. Have you met men like that? Not Hugh Grant, but I mean, just somebody who doesn't.
Super true. What's the term for? I should know this. The phenomenon where like a guy's refractory period shrinks with new partners.
Oh, I don't actually know what the term is. There probably is a term. Yeah.
I forget, but this is the thing. Definitely, men are much more hardwired for novel partners than women are. This is true.
And that's been your experience both. So I'm going to ask you these both experientially and then your data, because you do a lot of interesting data collection. And that's what your data shows too. Men prefer more partners. Here's the study on that. Even in the most egalitarian countries, men prefer more sexual partners compared to women. In Norway, researchers asked people how many sex partners they would prefer over the next 30 years. On average, women preferred 5, men preferred 25. Even the desire to kiss before intercourse differs between the sexes. About 53% of men report that they would have sex without kissing, while only 14.6% of women would have sex without kissing.
I actually did a survey on what is the stigma against body count. I wanted to see, like, does your ideal body count more or less than what you think society's ideal body count is for you? And for both men and women, they wanted to have more partners than they thought society would judge them for having. But it wasn't very high. I think my numbers were like closer to like between 8 to 15, and the gap between men and women's reports was not that big. But I did the survey a while ago, and I would have to go look at my data again to remember exactly what it was. But I don't remember having the same level of gap as that survey. But who knows which survey is correct? I didn't look at their methodology, and I don't remember mine. So
here's one that was really depressing, and I'm so glad I'm not single online dating. Studies of online dating, for example, find that most men find most women to be at least somewhat attractive. By contrast, women on average view 80% of men as below average in attractiveness. Another study found that on the dating app Tinder, men liked more than 60% of the female profiles they viewed, while women liked only 4.5%. Oh my God, these poor guys, they have no chance.
I think this is probably the OkCupid surveys, my guess.
I think so, yes.
But I think that this is slightly misleading. Like, the things that women just like are sort of presented in a different format. Women like narrative a lot more, as opposed to photos. Like you might argue that the difference is like, oh, men watch a lot of porn and women don't really like watching porn that much. But in my surveys, if I include erotic content that's not visual, the rates get pretty close to each other. Women still don't consume erotic content as much as men do, but it's not a giant gap. So like, I think people aren't really processing erotica or non-visual like erotic stimuli as meaningful in some way. And I'm like, this is exactly what's happening. On OkCupid, you're showing photos. And of course, the women aren't going to rate them highly. But if the guy gets to engage in some kind of narrative to like demonstrate his sexiness in some sort of more powerful way to like women's psychology, then my guess is the ratings would much more even out.
Like a romance novel.
Yeah, if you could just star yourself in a romance novel.
That's really funny. Okay, sexual regrets. Sexual mistakes are viewed differently. Research indicates that when asked to reflect on their sexual history, women are more likely to regret having had sex with someone, while men are more likely to regret having missed out on sexual opportunities.
Yeah, true for classic. I mean, like, women get pregnant. Like, this is what it all boils down to. Sex is more dangerous for women than men.
Yeah.
It makes sense that women are like more sort of neurotic and sensitive around it.
Risk averse is
pregnant.
Risk averse, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Pregnancy, obviously, more opportunities for STDs and violence and so forth. Yeah. So they have to be super careful and therefore choosy. What men and women look for in a mate. For same-sex friends, men and women prioritize personality and social intelligence. For opposite-sex friends, though, men assign greater value on attractiveness, whereas women place greater value on economic resources and physical prowess. I guess you covered that already. Yeah.
Women are interested in status. Like right now I'm writing a series on how to be good at sex, where I'm like breaking down how sex works and what things men can do in bed that like hook a woman's brain, and quite a lot of it is to do with like signals that are attached to power, in varying ways, which I think is like quite tied to socioeconomic status.
Oh wow!
Stuff like that.
Okay, give us some tips. Give the men listening some tips. Single men, I mean.
I don't want to give away too much,
Okay.
I'll say so. One thing, one part of my blog is like so you want to demonstrate sort of a kind of outcome independence or non-reactivity, not in that you do not care about her, but rather that you are not hyper reactive to what she's doing. Like, for example, so I went around and interviewed a whole bunch of women about what makes sex good. I'm about to launch into this whole thing. Let me know if this is too
Oh
much.
no,
But I
go.
interviewed a whole bunch of women about what makes sex good, and a very common thing was like you sort of get yourself out of the brain. You're no longer like thinking about what you're doing, what your position is, what you have to do today. You're no longer like strategizing, but rather you're sort of primal, embodied, and your sort of mind gets turned off. And so my guide is like, how do we get men to turn off a woman's brain? Of course, in a consensual, voluntary, delightful way. And so one example I give is that like you need to sort of not reinforce the ways that a woman's brain is trying to navigate a sexual situation. Like if you're having sex with a guy as a woman, you are trying to do a lot of things. You're like making sure you look good, making sure you don't have fat rolls, making sure you're moaning in not a weird way, right? So your brain is doing quite a lot of like controlling. And the goal as a man is to sort of cause her to lose her sensation of like attempting to control the sexual situation. This doesn't necessarily have to mean dominance and submission, but it can. And like one example is like if she wants you to like stop eating her out because she's getting self-conscious that she's taking too long to have an orgasm, you should delay your response to her request, because this demonstrates that like if she wants you to do a thing out specifically out of an urge to like sort of a anxiety urge to make the sex better, then you should demonstrate that the anxiety urge is not going to get a direct response. So to train the anxiety brain that it does not have control here, if you're trying to anxiety orchestrate the experience, it's not going to have an effect. Whereas I think a lot of guys sort of misinterpret this and be like, oh, I'm supposed to be very nice and immediately agree with everything that she wants in bed. And there are many cases in which this is true, and like I go over this in my writing, but there are many cases in which this actually deeply backfires, and in fact, like gives sort of the anxiety brain much more foothold in the sexual experience. Anyway, that's like one of the parts
Yeah.
of the
Wow.
series.
Wow. There's your next book. Not just a
Yeah, I'm
blog.
working on it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. You would sell a lot of copies of that. There's inquiring minds want to know. I mean, looks matters, right, to women. I mean, if you're Brad Pitt, that's that's got to count for some points. But if you're average looking, then you can make up for it by what? Status and humor, intelligence.
Yeah,
Yeah.
confidence.
Confidence. What about
Yeah,
height? Women like
women do
taller men,
seem to
right?
like that.
I mean, there is research on this that I think it's 2 inches, I think is the average that women prefer men to be taller.
I didn't know that.
Yep. And younger. There's an age cohort effect as men get older as they remarried. Sometimes this is called the Rupert Murdoch principle. Every 10 years he gets older, he marries somebody 10 years younger than the previous wife. So the gap just keeps, I don't know if this is generalizable, but there, I guess the idea is for women, status, resources, for men, youth. Now, of course, no one's doing these calculatings. The idea behind evolutionary psychology is that natural selection programmed these emotions in our brain so we don't have to do the calculating. The example I use is like the 0.69 hip to waist ratio that men prefer in a women's figure. Well, no one's walking around a bar with calipers measuring waist hip. You just look and go, that looks good, right? You just have a kind of an emotion. And that's the proxy for, and it turns out, but not just that, but also like clear complexion, symmetrical faces. These are good proxies for genetic health. And therefore, this person is more likely to give me healthy offspring, something like that. Again, no one's thinking this. It's just wired into our brains.
Oh yeah, because like the people who weren't like this sort of died off, right? Like I study a whole bunch of sexual fetish stuff, with like differences between men and women, and it's really interesting to think that like people who had these fetishes or like these sexual preferences were more likely to survive. it sort of gets like a lot more empathy for both genders, because I think there's a little enmity between the genders. It's like, why are both of us so shallow? Well, it's like the people who weren't shallow didn't reproduce.
There was another study I cited that I liked was for every college degree you have, bachelor's, master's, PhD, it's worth 2 inches of height. So if you're like me, sort of average height, you can get like 2, 4, 6 more inches. Oh my God, I'm up there now, 6 feet. Well, I always wanted to be 6 feet. I can get 3 degrees and make up for it. I mean, that's just crazy. But I think there is some truth to that. Okay, fetishes. There may be an evolutionary origins to this, but maybe it's just a fluke, just a weird thing that happens culturally or whatever. What have you learned about this? I just don't know too much about it.
About how
fetishes and why do people have them? Is there some adaptive purpose to this, or is it just a weird thing?
I think it depends a lot on the fetish. Not all fetishes are created equal. I don't have despite having a massive amount of data, I don't have great info. Because nothing seems very conclusive. And if people claim to know how fetishes work, most of the time they are completely bullshitting. I think it's very easy to sort of make up narratives that feel true. One example is like if you have a foot fetish and you're like, well, I remember when I was 4 years old, my grandmother would always, like push me on my face with her feet, and this is probably what caused my foot fetish. And I'm like, okay, did it cause the foot fetish, or were you already prone to having a foot fetish? And then like when the feet happened, that's the first time you remembered it. That's the first time it flared up. It got triggered, basically. So like, which way does the causality go? This is why like a lot of people's narratives about their own onset of a fetish, I sort of don't trust that, because it's very easy for the narratives to get warped a little bit in that way. But we don't really know what causes fetishes. To some degree, I think it's hormonal. One interesting fact that I don't deeply understand is that trans people are more similar to each other than they are the biological sex. So when I was first studying this, I'm like, okay, for example, like trans women, are their sexual fetishes more similar to the way biological men have sexual arousal or the way biological women do? And the answer is it's closest to trans men. If you are trans at all, regardless of your biological sex, you share quite a lot of like sexuality, basically, which is totally fascinating. This means that there's something going on in the brain that like causes some sort of like gender dysphoria that is really tied to a unique third set of fetish responses, which is super fascinating. And I don't understand very much about how or why this works, but that's super cool.
Okay, so one of Louise's arguments in the case against sexual revolution is that, and she actually, I think I brought you up, and then her response was, well, she's young. Wait till she hits her late 30s. She's going to resent doing this because all of us young women made stupid mistakes in our 20s. We had lots of sex and big fun because the feminists told us this is what we should do. But in fact, our brains and bodies are not designed to act like male sexual beings, and therefore this is now going to have a long-term effect.
Yeah, it's like a pretty classic kind of argument. Like I said, typical mind fallacy. You sort of don't, you assume that if somebody is different from you, it is like fundamentally a mistake, or you're traumatized in some way, that like deep down you secretly must be like the sort of the normal woman, and you're sort of going to figure out some sort of narrative. Yeah, I don't think this is true. I know a lot of older women who had a lot of sex in the same way I did when they were younger, and don't regret it and have a good time. People were telling me I was going to regret it in 5-10 years when I started doing this when I was very young. I have no increased signs of regretting this at all. I would encourage her to engage in a betting market. I would be happy to place money if she thinks that I'm going to regret it. I would like to be paid. And if I do regret it, then I will pay her. I think this would be like a great way to make beliefs pay rent.
All right. I like that idea. But again, if instead of a binary categories, if we just think of it as two overlapping bell curves with different means, then you can just be on the one side of the bell curve and, over by where the men are. So what? So that doesn't disqualify the concept of there being average differences.
There's also like a way that doing fetish research has given me a lot of respect for the variety of human brains. Like, I talk to a lot of people with really unusual sexual structures, just like crazy. Like, one guy I talked to, his fetish was a very specific scene. I'm not going to say it just in case I don't want to like act like if his friends know it or something. So I'm not going to say the movie scene. There's a very specific movie scene in a superhero movie, like one brief scene that he masturbates to, and that is it. He finds no other movie scenes to be hot, the elements present in that one movie scene are not hot when they exist in porn. It is a single scene that he watches over and over and over again for years, and this is what he masturbates to. Or like, oh, it's like one person liked it when people accidentally gain weight, and it has to be accidental, and it has to be only between 5 to 10 pounds, and it has to be over a short period of time, and it has to like be exemplified by her not fitting into her shorts. Like, just extremely specific, narrow things. And I'm like, dude, human brain wirings? There's just like a vast landscape of crazy ways that sexuality can be, and it's so cool. I really love it. But it's just like the idea, like the more that I've been talking to people with strange fetishes, the more I just respect that this exists in a genuine, ingrained way for people. I'm like, oh, you're not like a normal person who got fucked up. You're just like a really cool expression of human variance. That is really lovely, and I would like to celebrate that. I would like to remove the shame around that.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people who I think who like assume that I'm going to regret it, or I must be secretly a normal woman who hates it. Like, I think they could be served a lot by going around and talking to people with abnormal sexualities. Because like, if you're trying to believe that these people secretly are normal and hated or whatever, like that just goes away when you interact with enough of them, and you can tell how genuine and deeply this exists for them.
Yeah. John Ronson, the writer, either did a book or a podcast series on sexual fetishes, and he interviewed this couple who made films. They were filmmakers for people that wanted a particular thing to watch that they could masturbate to. And the detail was incredible. It's like they followed all the instructions, and then he's like, no, the camera angle has to be over here. I need it from this perspective, not from the right side, the left side. He's like, what?
Yeah. It's so cool. It's like sad and inconvenient because sometimes you have fetishes that's just very difficult to satisfy, and that part is tragic. But besides that, I find it really delightful.
Is there reliable data that you can get from the big porn sites like Pornhub or any of the big dating sites that you trust?
Yeah, I mean, Pornhub releases data. I think it's generally good. I think it has limitations, as all data does, as my data does. Limitations are like Pornhub doesn't allow certain fetishes on it. So you cannot get data about any more obscure fetishes. Sorry,
like violence.
Yeah, any violence, any depictions of non-consent, for example. And like, for example, non-consent in violent porn is definitely female preferred. So now we've got like a gender imbalance even greater on the porn sites because you're removing female preferred porn. Or like, algorithm stuff might have impacts, or like the way that things are categorized might have impacts on the way people view it. I do not mean that the data is not good. All data is good data. You just have to interpret it correctly. And I'm very pro us learning things from Pornhub data.
So we did as I showed you the issue on, and here's how we depicted internet porn with nut and bolt.
That's really good.
Yeah, that was.
Did you come up with that?
No, my partner, Pat Lindsay, right there, who passed away 2 years ago. She was my partner and art director. She was brilliant at that. So we had debates. I think one side was that it's ruining young male expectations of female sexuality. This is what women like. They like facials and they like anal, and then they go out in the real world and find out it's not actually like this. So it's unrealistic. On the other side, it was like, this is actually a great release, and what's the harm as long as no one's hurt, and so on. So we kind of went back and forth on that. What are your thoughts on internet porn?
It's complicated. It's really complicated. I have a lot of nuanced thoughts about the which parts you're talking about. But so I did one survey, both with paid randomized responses and with like normal snowball sampling, where I asked men like, how much porn do you watch? And then I asked them to predict what things women would like in bed. And then I asked women in the same survey, if a man tried this in bed, how much would you like it? So you get to see sort of like men's predictions of what women would like and women's actual responses. And men who watched porn more were more accurate in their predictions about what women would like. The least accurate men were the guys who did not watch porn at all. And this might be confounded by something like overall sexual interest or something, like maybe hornier men are more experienced or something. But still, and like I said, women tend to prefer more violent, more power dynamic struggle type porn than men do. So when people complain about that aspect of porn, I'm like, yes, but it is good. Like, porn is violent, and this is a good teaching of men what women want. To be clear, consensual is very important. Women do not want to actually be raped. They just like dominant submission. Super, super common. But what else was I going to say?
And what is that a proxy for? That a strong man or a dominant or high status male?
Yeah, I mean, you're more likely to give birth to more aggressive sons in some way. Um, it's like the biggest gap between men and women is that women seem to be much more interested in submission compared to how much men are interested in dominance. Oh, but you did mention facials and anal, and those interestingly are in fact quite gendered in the direction of men. Men prefer this, like one of the best predictions. So right now I'm building a predictor of gender where you get to put in things that you like sexually, and I predict if you're man, woman, or trans or cis. And one of the strongest predictors for biological sex is, do you like anal sex, in the direction of being male. So you actually did pick the two that are in fact teaching men the incorrect things, which is really funny because everybody's very upset about porn teaching people the wrong way to have sex. But like at one point I suggested we should like make educational porn. Like, hey, we're intentionally going to make porn that teaches like teens, people who are first starting to watch porn, what good sex looks like, good communication practices, like healthy, good distribution of what interests are. And people are extremely offended that you might make porn to intentionally show to minors. And I'm like, you can't have it both ways, right? Like kids are going to be watching porn. They're going to get around your filters. We have VPNs, and you just are going to let them do that. Like the next best thing I think is to sort of intentionally redirect them to something more educational and healthy.
Yeah, this is this larger problem of controlling children online on social media sites, which, people like Jonathan Haidt are arguing we need age restrictions. Well, how are they going to enforce that? And the Facebook people and so on are saying, oh, we can't do it. Well, they just don't want to spend the money and they want more customers, but they can do it. Well, I don't know. You'd have to have some kind of identity system where, like the equivalent of your driver's license that like you scan at the airport now that allows you in or not. I don't know. What are your thoughts on checking age on porn sites and things like that?
I'm a little edgy in this opinion. I don't really see the problem with kids who naturally have a sex drive, who are actively, voluntarily seeking out sexual content. I don't see that as being bad. I think the problem is that we are not pairing it with education. Like, I think kids are people, and I am like I remember being a really horny teen when everybody was trying to make me not horny, and that was horrible. I think it's really dehumanizing, and I think it like leads to long-term fucked up shame stuff around sex. Like much prefer redirection. So I'm like, the problem is not that kids have a sex drive and are trying to access sexual content. I think that this is a fine and natural, healthy exploration. I think the problem is we're not helping them do so in a less damaging way. We're just like, oh, we think this is bad, we're going to freak out, and so the only things left are the terrible stuff. It's like the drug war. It's like now the only stuff on the street is the stuff that's going to kill you because like we've stamped out like easy access to the less harmful stuff, and even suppressed research for the good stuff because we find it too like disgusting or morally objectable. But I'm very like consequentialist in this way. I'm like, what? Look at the impact. What is the impact of what we're doing? And if it's bad, then we shouldn't. And if it's good, we should. And we should fuck the disgust response. Like even if it feels gross to do, I think we should still do it.
Yeah, I side with you on that, on both drugs and sex work. Yeah, just decriminalize it. What about adults watching porn? Okay, so is there a problem or not? Here's my take. If your partner doesn't want you to do it or is unhappy about it, well, or because you're doing that instead of having sex with your partner, then it's a problem. But if neither person cares and you're still having enjoyable sex with your partner, then it doesn't matter. That would be a consequentialist argument. But since men like porn so much more than women, could that be a problem in couples?
So men like porn only a little bit more than women, to be clear.
Okay,
If we're
okay.
including erotica, women really like that stuff. Yeah, it could be. So this is a slightly a side note, but one really interesting thing is that people have this concept that men watching porn reduces sex drive. Like, oh, these young men are watching porn and they don't want to go out and find a girl to date because all of their sexual impulses get, absorbed into, a heat sink. Or they're not going to fuck their wives because their sexual impulses get absorbed. But what's interesting is if you increase the tabooness of the type of sex that they're watching, people are more likely to say that it causes the desire as opposed to absorbs the desire. So normal sex, people are like, it absorbs the desire. And if you're like anal sex, people are like, well, probably mostly absorbs the desire. And if you do something taboo, like you want to like do CNC or like, role play non-consent, people are going to be like, it amplifies the desire. So people's like idea of how porn is impacting interaction depends quite a lot on whether or not they approve specifically of the kind of porn that they're watching. If they think that the porn is bad and really taboo, they view that porn as being dangerous because it makes the guy more likely to do it. But if the porn is vanilla, then it's like, oh, it's dangerous because it makes the guy less likely to do it. So it's interesting that like people's brains are sort of very inconsistent about the way that they're reasoning. And I don't mind an argument that porn is bad. I would just like those arguments to be consistent all the way through. Like at least make your worldview coherent.
Yeah, I'm a pretty much a utilitarian consequentialist on that. Do you have a gambling problem? Well, I don't know. If you lose all your money and you can't make your house payment, then yeah, you have a problem. Or shopping or porn or whatever. If your spouse leaves you and takes the kids, you probably have a problem. If you get fired from your job, you probably have a problem. Mm-hmm. Alcohol or whatever it is. Yeah. So
that's right.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay. So let me just tee up this other. Oh, I know I was going to ask you because Bill Maher was riffing on this in one of his new rules the other day. What's with the she's having sex with her stepson themes on these porn sites? Is that just some weird fetish thing or what? Or is that just a trendy?
Unclear. My guess is that it's like useful. It's the kind of thing that you can put on a video title, and you attract people with that fetish, and you don't off-put people without that fetish. It's like a very just convenient frame to slap on for not a lot of cost, is one theory. But I don't have good theories around it in general because like it's not a uniquely popular fetish. Incest. It's like relatively rare compared to other things on porn sites. So my guess is it has something to do with like the production or the algorithm.
Here's another quote from David Buss's work. Why do people cheat on their romantic partners? For men, it appears to be the main reason they stray is the desire for sexual variety. In fact, men who cheat are just as happy in their marriages as men who are faithful. By contrast, women who stray are often...
Wait, sorry, I was blowing my nose. Men who cheat in marriages are what? As much as men are faithful?
Are just as happy in their marriages as those who are faithful and don't cheat. So they're just doing it for sexual variety. By contrast, women who stray are often unhappy. Women who have affairs often want to detach themselves from relationships in which they are unsatisfied and seek a better partner. In fact, only 30% of men report falling in love with their affair partners, while for women it's 79%.
I'm not sure what study he is referencing or if he did the study. I am pretty sus about the fact about the claim that men who cheat are not more unhappy than men who don't cheat. I wouldn't be surprised if this is more the case compared to women, but like I was an escort. A lot of guys cheated on their wives with me, and some of them reported being happy with their wives. Some of them were like, "We have a great life, and I just want sexual variety." But I would say that was a minority of the guys. Most men would say. Like the classic story that I heard over and over and over again was, I've been married for 20, 30, maybe 40 years. I love her so dearly. She's the world to me. We have a whole bunch of kids and a life and a house and we work together and it's incredible. But she stopped having sex with me 2 decades ago. And I'm so horny I want to die. Like that is like variations on that are just the most common theme I've ever heard. And so I would count that as being unhappy in marriage to some degree. I also did a survey. I think sample size was like 30,000 or something of people in relationships, or maybe it's 10,000. I'm sorry. Of people in relationships, and I measured relationships over time. So if you've been in a relationship very long, how is it? And the amount that you have sex was very correlated with other positive things about the relationship. So saying like my relationship is going well, I don't regret the relationship, lots of like quality statements, were strongly associated with the amount that you are having sex with your partner.
Did you ever feel like you just want to tell these women, look, just have sex with your guy. Come on.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, like, it's hard. It's hard for both parties because if you're a woman who's like lost a sex drive or you have medical issues or whatever, like it doesn't feel good to force yourself to do something that you don't want to do just to oblige your partner who would probably is not thrilled that you don't want to be having sex in the first place. Like, I think ideally you just sort of outsource it. I think that in the ideal world, if a woman doesn't actually want to have sex with her husband, she should not force herself to do so. She should just send him to go get his sexual needs met with an escort. I think escorts are way better than having an affair because affairs are much higher risk of like falling for the person or like it impacts your social circles in some way. But escorts are highly incentivized to not do this. Are not interested in falling in love with you. It's very clear boundaries around the interaction. And then you should just get the sexual needs met and come back. I know a lot of women sort of chafe at this for other reasons, but my guess is it's very cultural. Like, did you see this one video going around of people interviewing Japanese girls asking like, if you got married and your husband had sex with an escort, would that be cheating? And they were all like, no. they just like didn't parse it as cheating. They're like, it's a sex worker, it's not an affair. And I think that like in some cultures this is the norm, and this might be a lot healthier because men and women have asymmetrical sex needs and drives, and like it's just sort of tragic that we expect women to like handle it. It's like a pressure. I'm like, I wish I could find a healthier outlet, and paying money for it seems like let the free market solve our problems. I'm very pro this.
Well, it puts it in a different category of economic pricing, market pricing, rather than a personal relationship. Bus also wrote a book called Jealousy, and why it evolved, really as a mate guarding strategy, emotion, really to get you to mate guard and protect. Men in particular are very hyper about their partner having sex with somebody else, because that the worst thing you can do is allocate your limited resources to somebody else's DNA, right?
Yeah.
And so then he had interesting data on men and women are roughly equal in their amount of jealousy. Imagine your partner having sex with somebody else. How do you feel? 9 out of 10, I'm upset. But specifically, what is it about it that bothers you? There was a male-female differences. Women were more concerned that he might fall in love with this other person. The men were more concerned that she's enjoying the sex and wants to have more sex with the guy.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I think like chimpanzees are really interesting because chimpanzees have hella mate guarding. Like all their sex is just horrible mate guarding sex where they basically like isolate the female and then intimidate her so that she like doesn't resist the male or scream when he like decides it's time to have sex when she's ovulating. Like it's pretty brutal. It makes sense. I feel like there's parental investment that humans do a whole lot. It makes sense to like really be incentivized to not raise other men's DNA. So thank God we have birth control and DNA testing now.
Yes, yeah. So we're no longer living in the Paleolithic. There was a book in the 90s. It was called Sperm Wars. And this was the argument that there's actually different kind of sperm cells. There's the kind we know that swim mightily to the egg and try to implant the egg. But there's two other kinds. One that protects the egg from other sperm coming, and then a third kind that actually attacks other guys' sperms through chemical signals or whatever. I'm not sure how the follow up on the research on that panned out, but in any case, that was the idea. Because this is an example of one of the things that Buss found in his studies on jealousy was that the first thing that comes to mind to a man when he finds out his partner had sex with another guy is he wants to have sex with her right now. Like, I got to get my boys in there to fight those other little guys. Of course, no one's thinking this. This is the argument from the evolutionary psychology.
Yeah, I think one theory is that this is why penises are kind of shaped like plungers.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. There is I should say, I'm a big fan of evolutionary psychology, but there is a robust feminist critique of evolutionary psychology. Too biological, too genetic, not cultural enough. But I was going to pivot to, I don't know if you're familiar with anthropologist Alan Fiske's 4 types of human relationships. And this is going to get us back to why people are not tending to support things like sex work and organ sales and things like that. So his 4 types are communal sharing, like between relatives, couples, marriage partners, families, friends, where you freely share resources within a group, no tab keeping, it's egalitarian, and so on. Then authority ranking, like employee, employer, teacher, student, parent, child. So there you have kind of a linear top-down hierarchy, dominance, status, age, size, strength, wealth, precedence, and so forth. Then the third one is equality matching, where friends like split gas, informal exchanges, tit for tat reciprocity, division of resources equitably, turn taking, coin flipping, matching contributions, cut, divide the cake equally, that kind of thing. And then the fourth one is market pricing, which is new. The first 3, the argument is that we evolved those emotions around those kind of relationships that we have with other people. The fourth one, market pricing, is new because we just only had money in the last few thousand years. So this is an economy of strangers. Money is the social currency of exchange and reciprocity and so on. So violations of these 4 models are what's insightful. So like if I go over to the local restaurant here and instead of paying, I offer to have the restaurant owner over to my house for dinner, this would not fly, right? Or if I have guests over to dinner at my house, my friends, and they take out their wallet and give me a credit card to pay for the dinner. Not cool. Or my favorite example, Woody Allen has a little bit where he holds up his wrist with a watch. He says, on his deathbed, my grandfather sold me his watch. It's like, what? Organ sales, you shouldn't sell a kidney. Come on, sex between employer. Well, this is why sex between employer and employee, teacher, student, parent, and child is taboo because of that difference. Anyway, that's the thought. So I think the problem you're facing with sex work is people are thinking of it in one of those other three. This is something that friends do or lovers or marriage partner. You don't pay for that. That's the sense there.
I think like historically it might have been closer to something like the coin flip where there is an exchange. You just sort of obfuscate it a little bit. Like historically, I think the classic thing is woman has sex with her husband to keep the husband happy, but is not particularly attracted to her husband, and the husband is very rich and old and pays for everything. Like it's kind of like, it's funny because sometimes escorts will get into exclusive arrangements. Like a guy will be seeing an escort, he likes her a lot, and so he will pay for just like a chunk of her time. Be like, for 6 months, I'm paying you only to see me. And I'm like, is this not kind of marriage? Like the idea of marriage is like purely love driven is sort of a privilege of being in a more post scarcity society than we used to be. Is my guess. But sex has always been deeply transactional. I mean, I'm sure you've heard the study of like the monkeys where they taught them how to use currency and then immediately they started paying for sex.
Yes. That might have been Franz de Waal's research or one of his grad students. Anyway, yeah. They train them to think of pebbles as currency that they can swap for better food or sex. Yeah, and they start acting very human-like. So again, the problem is like my type specimen here is that movie Indecent Proposal, where Demi Moore plays the wife of Woody Harrelson, and then they meet Robert Redford, who's a billionaire. Have you seen this movie? No, you should watch this. It touches on a lot of these themes. So they're a happily married couple, young couple, and they're on a little vacation to Vegas, and they're shooting craps in the casino. And there's Robert Redford, who's this noted billionaire. And so they're shooting pool, and they're just kind of having fun. And he says, so, what would it take for me to, have a night with your wife? Like if I offered you $1 million, and then so the rest of it kind of plays out like this. Initially it's like, oh no, this is not something Then they start thinking, later in the night they're in bed going, this could really change our lives. We have no money, and it would just be sex. I mean, and she's like, it's just going to be sex. Anyway, they go around and around for like half an hour in the film, and then she goes, all right, I'll do it. So then they have a contract, and then their lawyer actually writes in a clause like, well, what if he can't perform? Does he still have to pay? He's like, yes. And he goes, I'll sign off on that. I'll be fine. But then Woody Harrelson's character, he just gets massively jealous after she takes off on this guy's helicopter. And so she shows up on the yacht, and she's like, do you want me to take my clothes off? He goes, no, that's not what this is about. So then that's it. That's all we see. That turns out, they spent like this wonderful total day and night together, and she rather enjoyed it. I mean, he's a nice guy. He's a good looking guy and so on. But then she kind of distances herself, but he can't let it go. So then she ends up with the Robert Redford character. And then, and then he feels really bad about this because now she's in love with him. And then so she dumps him. He dumps her by saying, oh, well, you're just one of many, and that kind of thing. So she goes back to Woody Harrelson. But it touches on a lot of those themes because what's the price? What's the number? And most responses is that there's no number. It's just, I'm outraged that you would even make an offer like that. My analogy here is if if Biden or Trump and, went to Israel and said, all right, we're going to settle this thing. We're taking the checkbook out here. What's the price for Israel? We'll just buy the whole thing. They would be outraged. Like, there's no price. This is sacred. This is that kind of sacred values versus market exchange. And I think most people think of sex as more of a sacred value rather than a market exchange.
Yep, I think this is largely true. I think people don't like looking at the fact that sex, like the ways in which sex is already transactional. And like when they do, they sort of get mad about it. Like pickup artists get a really terrible rap because they are using what most people think of as like non-genuine methods to get sex out of somebody. Which I would consider to be pretty transactional. Like, oh, we're like doing maneuvers in order to achieve sex, even if the lady like enjoys the experience and voluntarily gives it. Like there's something about like thinking too hard or being too manipulative about a sexual interaction really triggers our disgust response. Um, we'd like there's a lot of like jokes around if you're marrying for money, you have to pretend that you really like his personality. Like you're not allowed to be honest about the ways in which sex is already transactional in our lives. Like being a gold digger is kind of an insult. You're not supposed to be a gold digger. But it's funny that in all the romance novels, the protagonists are quite wealthy. So it's like it's a weird thing where I think it's like we're sort of collectively embarrassed about it in ourselves. And maybe there's a way in which like sex work makes that too obvious. Like we're trying to hide our own
Right.
incentives. And sex
Right.
work is just like, hey, did you know that sex is valuable? And you could pay money for it and be like, oh God, this is not the truth. No, 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 sex is sacred. Sex has nothing to do with material wealth. It's about love. Which often it is, to be fair. It can be a very connective and sacred experience for some people, but
I
it also
forget
has value.
I forget who the feminist was that said, all dating and marriage is a financial exchange. You can rent it, you could buy it, but it's still a financial exchange. We're calling it something else, dating and a contractual marriage and so on, but it's still a financial arrangement.
Yeah, but I'm pro financial arrangements. I think that like free markets are really cool. And I think like exchanging money for something like leaves both people better off. We've just increased the total amount of value in the world. I think that's fucking dope. If anything, I view that as kind of sacred.
So most of your fellow sex workers that you've interviewed and surveyed, they mostly just turn off the emotions. That it's just a logic tight compartments. They keep it separate. This is my job, and I'm not going to get attached to this guy. Maybe some of them even are in a relationship.
Yeah, a lot of the escorts I know are in a relationship. Many are married. It's just the way it works. But yeah, it's interesting how like the context is really important. Like if a doctor goes and like looks at a woman's vagina for medical purposes, we sort of don't think of him as having to cut off his emotion. Like maybe he did, but it's just like not really the way it works. Like context just is different. You just sort of are thinking differently and behaving differently. Like the things that you're doing mean drastically different things. When you're a doctor, like, doing a surgery on a woman's vagina, this is not sexual for you. And I think like people sort of don't understand how powerful the context can change your experience of a situation. And I think that's very much the same for escorting. Like when I'm having sex with a guy, to me, it's like, it's just such a different thing when he's paying for it than when it is with my partners. It's like I wish I had a different word for it because it just feels so different.
Yeah, this is interesting. Let's just riff on this for a second. So you're not a sex worker, you're just dating, but you really like guys that have a lot of resources and money. And it's nice when they pay for it and they take you out to a nice resort or they fly you on their private plane or whatever. And then you have sex with them. How is that different if the guy just says, I'm taking the checkbook out and we're going to go on my private plane and we're going to have fun. And at the end of the night, we're going to have sex.
Yeah, it's a loss of the what's the term? Like being explicit about it, so plausible deniability, which is interesting because you can see the price difference between sugar babies and escorts. They're doing basically the same thing, but there's like some subtle rule shifts when you're a sugar baby. Like you typically pay more in bulk. For example, you pay for like 4 dates at once as opposed to one, or you typically go on a sort of a date, like a meet and greet first to like figure out if you're compatible or something before you go forward. And so it's like slightly different, and so you kind of call it dating, but it's like more explicit. But what's interesting is the pay. It's around like a third, roughly as much as an escort. So like it's a lot cheaper.
Wait, the sugar daddy is less than the escort?
Yeah, like if I were a sugar baby, I would be able to charge around a third of the price as if I were an escort.
Why is that again? Explain that.
Right. So it's the plausible deniability.
Okay, right.
Right. So you get to, as a woman, you get to claim like society's blessing of I'm not a sex worker. I am simply engaging in a slightly more explicit form of dating, kind of the thing that you're describing. And like being able to claim dating means that a lot more women are willing to do it and means that you get to charge a lot less. Which is really interesting because like with normal dating, you're not charging very much at all. Like you're getting paid for meals, maybe like access to sleeping in his nice apartment or something. So the more explicit you are about like your interest in transactional sex, like the higher the price goes. So it's just cool that you get to see like that price differential, like for literally the only difference being the narrative.
Right. So if a wealthy guy came to you and said, I'd like to hire you for the next year and you can't be with anybody else, you're just with me, We're going to go out on dates. We're going to go on a vacation. You're going to go to my sister's wedding, whatever. And you do all that. Yeah. How's that any different than if you just dated a guy?
Yeah, I mean, like, there's a mutual knowledge thing, right? Like most people aren't dating with the expectation that you're going to break up in a year
I
unless
see.
you get a check. Right.
Right.
So there are, in fact,
Yeah. Yeah. Of
practical
course.
differences.
Yeah.
But you're right that a lot is very similar in spirit.
If you did something like that, would you ever act? Do you think you would, or have you fallen in love with one of these guys?
I haven't, but I really like being alone. I really, really, really like being alone. And like the kind of interesting and lovely a man has to be in order to beat me being alone is very rare for me to find.
Oh, interesting. So you're not in a relationship now. Have you ever had a long term?
Well, I'm poly, and I have one partner right now.
Oh, okay. All right. And he's obviously cool with what you're doing.
Yeah. He threw my birthday gangbang. So
Oh, I think I read that on your Wikipedia page of all places. That's right. You was
Wikipedia?
it? Yeah, you orchestrated. Yeah, you orchestrated a gang. No, it was
Well,
an
he
orgy.
orchestrated the
Oh,
gangbang
he did
for
it.
me as a gift.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay. And what's that like? Like an orgy or a gangbang? Is it fun? Is it interesting? Is it entertaining? Is it boring? What's it?
Well, the birthday gangbang was surreal because I've done orgies and that's nice and fun and that's like a very common thing. But the gangbang was like it was the less fun than I was hoping. I wouldn't do it again. I'm glad that I did it. To be clear, I do not regret it, but it was not sufficiently fun to make me want to do it again. It was just like it's just logistical. It's too logistical. It's like you have to navigate getting internet randos and you have to get them STD tested in a way where you can independently verify their testing. And you have to test for additional things because like there's other fun new STDs going around that people don't know about. You have to like verify their safety, and so it was like, and then you have to like get them in line, and then there were 42 guys, and which would be
Wow.
sex for a very long amount of time. Each one got like 2 to 3 minutes, and then they were in a line, and then like, you have to get hard. But how do you get yourself hard when everybody else is jacking off? So we had fluffers for these
Oh
ladies
my
who were
God,
helping like
fluffers.
keep them hard.
Right.
It was just a logistical nightmare, and it just like the actual experience of it was not very sexy.
Oh my God.
It was just really weird.
Do you know the evolutionary psychologist Jeffrey Miller at the University of New
Yeah.
Mexico? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So
we're friends.
yeah, he does. I think he's still poly. He got married, but he's been promoting
To Diana,
poly.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So you know them. Okay. So, but when he talks about it, it's like the effort to go through, all the exchanges and emails and agreements, and it's like, who has time for this?
Yeah. I know people's like, what's the meme? Like what people think I do. And it's like a orgy of just flesh. Like what I actually do is like a photo of me like on spreadsheets, making sure, like checking people's verification levels. It's logistically really annoying.
Right.
It's worth it sometimes. I've occasionally had really transcendent experiences getting railed at orgies, but it's
Getting
hard to get that.
getting what again? Railed?
Getting railed, yeah.
What is that?
Like it's an expression for just getting like pounded.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I trust that's not good.
Oh, it's great. It's
Oh,
fantastic.
it's good. Oh, okay.
Yeah, you know the phrase like "get railed in a sundress." Like, oh, I railed her. But really,
No, I'm sorry. I'm so square. I'm a boomer.
that's okay.
Come on.
Well, it's a phrase, and I really like the phrase.
Railed in a sundress. Okay, so
Yeah.
you pull up your sundress and you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like a common fantasy. Yeah.
I see. Oh, it's it's a fantasy too, right? Yeah, yeah. I mean, these are changing times, I guess. Let's put it into a larger cultural context. Let's say over the last century or even several centuries. I mean, how would we even know what's normal now?
How do we know it's normal? What you
Yeah,
mean, like common?
Yeah, I mean, because it changes so rapidly. I mean, just as a data analyst, kind of studying human sexuality, it's so context and cultural dependent that you have these kind of evolutionary psych arguments for what we're programmed to like or dislike, but then you have culture, which is massively influential and changing by the. I don't know. I just mentioned I'm a boomer, and you're a Gen Zer or a Gen Xer, millennial, whatever you are. It's very different. So what could change still more?
Yeah, my guess is that this is kind of pulled out of my ass. Maybe I'm going to come back next year and be like, lol, I've changed my mind. But currently my theory is something like we are born with innate preferences and then culture changes how those express. So it's like, for example, maybe if you're in an extremely conservative culture, a woman flashes her ankle and you're like, the shot of the ankle is very erotic. But whereas like maybe if you live in California, like a girl bends over and you accidentally see like her panties, you might be like, oh my God, like the bottom of a woman's buttocks, right? So like, is the question, is one person really into buttocks and another person really into ankles, or are they into an accidental exposure, right? So like maybe the base level is accidental exposure, and then the way that this is expressed in different cultures changes because what that means is different. So my theory right now is that we have base sort of a lot more inherent built-in drives or like ways that we're sexually oriented. And then just culture sort of imprints different meanings on what those are. Like if you have a disgust response fetish, maybe the thing that triggers the disgust response is going to be very different in different cultures. And then you sort of latch onto this sort of early on as like you're learning what disgust means, for example.
Yeah. Oh, that was another one I forgot to bring out, ask you about S&M. Which is the stronger one, S or the M?
Sadism,
just as an impulse or desire. Sadism or masochism?
Probably masochism, if I had to argue this, mainly because it's more popular, and when people are into it, they're usually into it more than they are into people who are into sadism or into it.
And what's the thing with choking? What's the, I don't know, what's the fetish or the turn on there?
Choking, I would say, is the spiritual equivalent to anal, in the way that like anal is very predictive of being male, choking is very predictive of being female. Choking is a highly gender disparate preference.
You mean
women
men,
really like it.
Oh, I see. And men don't want to be choked.
Men do not like choking women as much as women would like men to choke them.
I see. Yeah.
And to be clear, for the record, you should always discuss this with your partner. Do
Yes.
not just randomly choke your partner. Consenting adults discuss things. But given that you're discussing things, women are much more likely to say that they like it.
Right. Yeah, there was that. I brought this up with Louise Perry, too. This Los Angeles Dodgers, Bauer, I think was his name, who apparently was into this with his girlfriend, and then it went too far. And then, she filed charges against him, and then the Dodgers fired him, and he lost, hundreds of millions of dollars in lifetime earnings and so on and so forth. And I think he was never clear to this, but in the trial it came out, or maybe the pre-trial, all the texts between them, and that she was into being choked and all that kind of stuff, but just not that much. Right. So he just went too far. So Louise's response was, that's what happens when you let the beast out. Men need to be, checked because there's an animal drive in there, and you don't want to play with that. So I guess you would say something like you just need very specific rules, or.
I had like one discussion with Louise, and I went in with a bunch of data and statistics because I thought that our arguments were going to be over that, and she did not use those at all. I think Louise is sort of arguing from vibes, but based on my data. So, for example, my big kink survey has a sample size right now of around 650,000 people.
Wow.
Most of them have no idea who I am. Vast majority have no idea who I am. And so this is probably like obviously data has limitations. It is a self-report survey. We can go into this. But like compared to a lot of the other research that's out there, it turns out that if there's a gap in sexual preference, it is that women want men to be more beast. Men are insufficiently beast. All of women's fantasies involve men being beast. To Edward Cullen in Twilight. Like if you like read romance novels, it's very much like the ravaging man. It just emerged from him, and he like tore her bodice off and pushed her up against a wall. I go over some of these romance novel tropes in my Good at Sex series when I like break down exactly what is happening in these sex scenes. And I'm like, in my data, this is shown. This is the biggest gap between men and women. This is, if you want to predict whether or not, if you're a man and a woman, it's very much into like, do you want violence or power in some way to happen to you as the recipient, as a woman? Like, that's just what women are into. And I just like, it's like one of the most obvious, strongest, and most replicable effects in fetish research and women's sexuality. And so, like, Louise claiming that that like men have a beast. I'm sure that this happens in some instances. I'm not saying, obviously, they're tail ends, right? Like, you can, of course, find instances of men like going too far for women who don't want it. A lot of rape are examples of this. But you can't dismiss the rest of the bulk of the population who aren't talking about their sexual preferences or their choking that goes well because they're being shamed for it and feeling like a weird fucked up woman for being into a kinky stuff because they're not supposed to be into a kinky stuff. That's not what good women are. Good women are feminists who take pride in themselves sexually and have men treat them well. And so it feels like a general bulk shaming of what is default female sexuality. Now, I'm working on a blog post right now, which is like women's sexuality is not default. Like the thing that we think of a kinky woman is in fact the default sexuality of woman. And like the fact that we're taking female sexuality in this way and making it into a kink is sort of like implicitly telling women that they are not normal. But they are. Just read the romance novels. Read 50 Shades of Grey, guys.
I think there is in Lit Crit studies analysis of romance novels versus like Jane Austen novels and things like that. All right, Ella, we've gone almost an hour and a half. So you're working on a book, new research project.
Yep, Good at Sex.
Good at Sex is
I'm doing a whole bunch of research, interviews, data to turn my Good at Sex blog post series into a book to hopefully help men have sex better.
Good. Yeah, that'll be hugely popular. And you have a publisher yet? Are you still shopping that around?
I'm still looking for my favorite deal.
How could this not be a huge seller? I mean, this is a massively important and interesting topic.
Yeah, I'm pretty optimistic. The blog post series itself has seen like really big popularity so far. It's like the most popular thing I've ever written on my blog.
Okay, so where can people find the blog? What's it called? Or
it's aella.substack. So AELA.
Oh, you have a Substack.
Substack.com.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. All right. Okay. Thanks, Aella. I really appreciate it. Thanks for your honesty and openness.
Thank you so much. This was great.